Hello, my niblings. This is your adulting advice I promised you. So, as you're setting off on your journey through life and becoming an adult and an older adult eventually, hopefully this will help you. So, here you go with the first episode. This first one is about love and relationships. And I'm sure all of you have had a little bit of experience with that, but wanted to give you some pointers about what you could expect from your current relationships and maybe your future ones. So let's get started. First, I'll tell you a little bit more about my relationship and love history. I was sort of on a mission when I moved to San Francisco back in 1986. I decided for myself that I was in this very highly gay city, San Francisco, and I needed to find a boyfriend. I had been dating for a couple of years and been very disappointing, and said, gotta find a steady boyfriend. Falling in love and ending your loneliness is not something that you can just check off on a to-do list. Almost universally in my life, when I have been the least expecting that I would find love, that's when it showed up. I set myself a deadline of 6 months to find a boyfriend. And so I was starting to feel a little pressure with 1 week to go. I went to a gay Halloween dance at San Francisco State University, and that's where I met Carl, who became my first lover. We were together for about 6 years, and it was just a fantasy for me to have a boyfriend that we supported each other, and we had great sexual life, and we had a common group of friends and all sorts of great things. We moved to a couple of different places together, and at times we would talk at the end of the day when we got home and see who had the worst day, and the other person would have to make dinner. And more than once, when I had come home from my job in book publishing with lots of manuscripts and had started to read them on the couch and eventually fall asleep, he had carried me into the bed to go to sleep instead of sleeping on the couch. It was very sweet. But eventually, Carl got sick and died of AIDS. And then I went into a rebound relationship with another guy who left his 19-year relationship to be with me. So he was sort of rebounding too. And the day we moved in together, eventually after dating for about 6 or 7 months, he decided he wasn't that interested in spending time with me anymore. He wanted to spend time with his friends again. So he had achieved what he wanted. And he kept coming up with all these little niggling little things that he felt like I was being negligent. I didn't put flowers on the dining room table, or I didn't turn on the porch light for him when he came home later. And the kicker was that I didn't bring him juice when he was shaving in the bathroom. I didn't think to do that. So fast forward to when I was in New York after some time with some alcoholics and drug addicts in Los Angeles. And I was dating there and kept finding really damaged guys to date. And I think the difference that I've noticed in the strangest way was during the pandemic, when I started dating virtually with Emilio, he was amazing to me because he had all these qualities that really fit well with mine. And he was like generous and smart and funny and handsome and nerdy about languages, just like me, and really wonderful guy. And the thing that I want to emphasize, I guess, is that what was different in that relationship from any other I had been in before, and well, it's a little bit with Carl, but the idea that we were both so grateful for the other person. We felt really lucky that the other person wanted to be with us, you know? And we both felt that way. Both of us say, you know, I don't know how I lucked into having a relationship with you. You know, I don't know how I got so lucky, you know? And that's something that makes all the other great things about relationships fall into place. You support each other, you know, with whatever projects you want to do. You deal with the changes that come along, and you talk about them because you respect the other person. That's very important. And you can't just continue on in a relationship where there's no passion. There's no point in it. If it's just convenient and just meets a couple of your needs, it's not a very good relationship. And sometimes we need those sort of transitional relationships to get us through until we can find something better. But at some point, you may find something better. Somebody that shares your passion, who you feel lucky to be around, and that you want to support in every way, and somebody who feels the same way about you. So there are some mechanical sort of biophysiological sort of things that happen when you get into a relationship or when you start dating somebody that you should know about. There is this concept in psychology called limerence. What it means is there's this hormone rush that comes with meeting a new person and getting excited about them that makes you less picky. You know, you just notice the difference that after the limerence wears off in about 6 months or so, you find those things that used to be endearing and cute are suddenly annoying and make you crazy. That's the physiological thing going on. Humans are made to couple long enough to procreate. So in the first 6 months, it's really easy to like the other person. It gets a little bit harder after that when the hormone rush wears off and you start having to deal with who they really are and how they fit into your life. So beware that shift. You've got to establish that you're really good friends and really respect each other before that limerence period wears off, or you may really end up resenting each other, and that's no fun. The other important thing about relationships is managing them. You can't just live your life however you want to when you're in a relationship. You have to consider the other person, of course. You can't just say, this is the way I am, deal with it. You know, that doesn't work. Nobody wants to deal with that. Everybody wants to feel like the person they love is willing to compromise and work with them and share responsibility. You can't be selfish. You have to be willing to compromise and, you know, sometimes do some things that you don't want to do, but you do them for the other person. it's a sacrifice that you make. And believe it or not, they probably do the same for you. You might not notice it, but they're probably doing the same thing for you. If they're not, then why are you in that relationship if they're not willing to sacrifice anything for you? And the same goes both ways, so don't be selfish. Make sure that you talk to each other. Communication is like the worst problem in relationships, because we don't want the other person to get upset. We sometimes don't talk about things because we think confrontation about something is going to make them upset. Or you'll get upset if you have to confront somebody, and you don't want to do that with that person. So you hope that you can just let it slide, but it keeps bugging you. And maybe they keep doing the same annoying thing, or they keep forgetting about you in some circumstance, or neglecting you in some way, and you can't just let it slide. You have to talk about it, even if it's difficult. Every conversation that you have with someone you love has to risk the possibility that they will break up with you and never see you again. So you have to approach it with that level of caution and respect for the other person, understanding their point of view and treating them very, very well if you're going to approach something that's difficult. But it's never a good idea. As much as you think you can hold it back, it's never, never a good idea to think that you can just let it go. We almost never can. As humans, I've met a lot of humans, and I can say this is a property of the species. It's not unique to me. And you probably have to deal with this too. Communication, and sometimes it's odd what people project onto you, They will project their mother or their father onto you. They'll project their previous lover or boyfriend or spouse onto you, or whatever it happens to be. And you might get into some very sticky psychological and emotional stuff when people are processing things that being with you brings up in them. It's tough, and it requires work. And if you don't think you can do it alone, get to a therapist. That's what they're there for, to help you guys communicate with each other. Because if you get to the point where you're just resenting the person all the time and snapping at little things that don't really matter, you've gone too far. You've let it go too long. You have to communicate. And the risk of not communicating is always worse than the risk of communicating. Here's an example. So the person you love walks in the door and walks right by something that he left or she left on the floor that morning. And you go, "Why the hell haven't you picked that up yet? You just walked right by it and you still ignored it." And the other person says to you, "Is there something else that's bothering you?" And the answer is, yes, there must be. I mentioned projection. So yes, that is part of relationships. When you get to some very deep levels of conversation, you find out that they're not really reacting to you, they're reacting to somebody in their past. The other thing that happens is when you have very little experience being an adult, which I'm afraid you still qualify as being a fairly freshman adult. You're still new at this. And some of you are not even there yet. What happens is you start to expect that everyone starts with the same set of ground rules as you do. And if you're dealing with people that grew up in the same hometown as you, have the same cultural references and everything the same. You still grew up in a unique family with unique dynamics because of your birth order and the relationship that your parents had with each other and with you. There's all sorts of things that make your expectations of what life is like and what the rules of living are different from everybody else. Nobody has any monopoly on what is the right way to do things or what should be valued over something else. There's no one right way. There's no absolute point of view. And a lot of what you have to do when you're talking to the person that you care about is you have to make them understand what your beliefs are, because you can't assume that they know how you feel about having children, for example. They may not know how you feel or feel the same way that you do about politics. They might not know about or feel the same way as you do about spending money on food. There's all sorts of things that you uniquely developed over the course of your lifetime, even the couple of decades that you've been at it. And it's not the same for anybody. Even things that you think are like societal norms. Remember when I was talking to you about my rebound lover, Jerry, in San Francisco? To him, it was perfectly normal and reasonable expectation that I should have flowers on the dining room table, that he shouldn't have to tell me to do it. I should do it on my own, because that's something that you do when you care about somebody. You put flowers on the dining room table for them. And it's like, where did you come up with that idea? I can do that, but you have to tell me. I don't, that was never part of my upbringing to do that. And, the orange juice in the bathroom, way weird. We're like, that shows I care about you and I should have known to do that. So there are things like that. You can't expect the other person to know what idiosyncratic things you have developed as beliefs and values in your lifetime. Sorry. So that wasn't even the worst one. At one point, I was working at my desk back in the back of the house, and he came home and found me working there very furiously on something. And he said, it seems like it would be common courtesy just to come and greet me at the door when I come in the evening. Like a dog? So the other part of relationships is the sex part. So that's tough, especially for you heterosexuals among you, because you have gender role expectations. If you're in a same-sex relationship, you don't have any of that sort of framework that you have to stay within. When it's a male and a female partner in a relationship, the sexual roles can tend to be strong expectations. They're not, like we said, people have different frames of mind. It's the case with sex too. Their frame of reference may be completely different. Some people that you meet might see sex as a purely romantic thing, and if they're not feeling romantic, they don't want to have sex, or if they don't feel loving toward you at that moment, they don't want to have sex. Some people that you may be with think of sex as a biological release. That's it. There's no emotional content at all. And so they're happy to have that sort of release as often as possible or whenever possible. So you can have those two extremes in the relationship. There are other sorts of things that happen. People can think of sex as being a battle for control, or they can think of it as being an act of domination over the other person. People can look at sex as being a way to escape their lives, so they get sort of maybe a little bit addicted to it. And there's sort of an expectation, more so with heterosexual relationships, that there's a certain amount of monogamy that happens, and the point at which you are monogamous is a matter for negotiation, or at least communication. That's something that you really have to decide for yourself, if you're willing to be monogamous with that other person. The other person decides in their own times. That's the thing with relationships too, is that they develop at different rates for each of the participants. So one person may feel like holding hands before the other person does. One person may feel like sleeping naked before the other person does. All sorts of things where you may eventually get to the same place, but it doesn't start out that way. You're at different places, and you develop that comfort or that interest in it at different paces usually. And that's part of what gets to be an issue with sex as well, is the pacing. How often you have sex is often a matter of expectation, and therefore a point of tension in a relationship. If you're trying to have children, it becomes even more fraught and more stressful for everybody. And certainly for males, it becomes a little bit harder to have sex when you're stressed. I guess it's possible for females too, yes, but especially if you're procreating. But anyway, it's not a slam dunk for anybody when they're under pressure. So maybe you expected this from me or not, I don't know. But another part of sex is sexuality. And I should probably talk to you a little bit about that as well, because I think most of you probably grew up thinking that you were going to be heterosexual. I did too. It was a little bit of a surprise when that wasn't the case. And it's important, if you haven't looked into it yet, that sexuality is a continuum. Check into this thing called the Kinsey scale. It's important. The research is a little flawed just because of the people that were used as subjects were not a good representation of the general public. But the idea is sound, that there's a certain percentage of people that exist at the extremes. And in the meantime, we've sort of decided that probably somewhere between 5 to 10% of people are, throughout their entire lifetime, exclusively heterosexual or exclusively homosexual. So 5 to 10% at those extremes. Those would be the Kinsey zeros and the Kinsey sixes, as it is. Kinsey zero is only ever having any fantasies or any sexual experience with the opposite sex. And Kinsey sixes are only ever having fantasies and experience with the same sex. So that begs a very big question. If that's 0 and 6, what's everybody in the middle? Some degree of bisexual, as it turns out. So the way they broke it up in the Kinsey scale was that they considered people at the next level, So 1s and 5s are people that still have only had either same-sex or different sex sexual experiences, but they may have had fantasies about the same sex or the other sex. So that's the next level. There's another bunch after that, around the 2s to the 4s, who may have done some same-sex or opposite-sex experimentation as adolescents, and then never since then, exclusively one or the other after that. And then the 3s, right in the middle, are people that are equally attracted to men and women, just right in the middle. So people that have or continue to have sex with people of both genders is close to maybe 40, 50, maybe even 60% of the population. So keep that in mind as you're meeting people in life. Gender may not be as much of a deciding factor in who you fall in love with as you expect it will be. And it may change over the course of your life. You may find yourself paying more attention to one gender over the other over the course of your life. And you may find that you split up your attraction, that you have sexual attraction for one gender, but sort of romantic attraction for the other gender. There are all sorts of ways that it can divide up depending on how your brain was developing when you were a fetus inside your mom. And then some environmental factors too, but you get the idea. Obviously, there are a lot of things related to sex and relationships that I could still talk about, but hopefully that gives you a few new things to think about. Have to end here. Don't want to get this much longer than a half an hour, or you're never going to pay attention to the whole thing. I know you.